I'm Andrew Hall, and this is Dead Hand Radio. My guest for this episode is UFO podcaster Dave Logan, host of Special Access Podcast, a one-stop shop for news, reviews, and stories of the weird, wild, and wonderfully mysterious haunted planet on which we live. Welcome to Dead Hand Radio, Dave.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for accepting the invite to come on the show. I've listened to your podcast. You started your podcast quite a while before I started mine, and so I became a fan of yours, and I appreciate you accepting the invitation to come on here.
Oh, that's no problem at all. I'm a really big fan of your podcast as well. I love the way you do things over there at Dead Hand. And yeah, it's an honor for me to even be asked to do this. This is my first appearance on somebody else's show. So,
Wow, very cool. Well, we'll take it easy on you. We'll go slow, and I won't give you too many hard questions. How about that?
thank you.
Yeah, as I was mentioning in the discussion we were having before we started the podcast, last night I had a live stream with Luis Jimenez of the Unidentified Celebrity Review YouTube channel. He started this movement on YouTube and Twitter called the Big Phone Home. Have you heard of this?
I have heard of this. Yeah, it's a great initiative. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. But anyway, as we were talking, and it kind of feels like a moot point now. But one of his sayings that he kept repeating that made a lot of sense was when you're doing something big, keep your expectations low, so that any success that you achieve, you're going to be happy with. And I thought that was pretty great insight, and a pretty good way to not be disappointed if you try anything really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that really is great advice. It's something I try to run my podcast by as well. The words that I try to run my podcast by, because for me, it's not about listeners, it's not about followers, it's about the content, and it's more of a personal journey than anything. That I'm inviting people to come along. It's not the podcast has no monetization. We've got no set schedule. It's just as and when I feel the need to interview someone.
Yeah, and I noticed that it looks like your feed has changed up recently. Now, I haven't heard the last 2 or 3 episodes that you put out, but it looks like a lot of your archives got dropped off somehow.
Yes.
Tell me what happened with that.
Yeah, I took a month, perhaps a 2-month break off over Christmas and in January. Just to deal with my family life, my home life a bit, and to just take a break from interviewing and researching for interviews. But I left it so long that I let my Spreaker subscription run out, and it was on a different card than the new one I'd been using, and I didn't realize until I was alerted by one of my previous guests, Jonathan Davies. He said, "Where is my episode gone?" I was like, "Oh, that's weird. It should be there." I had a look, and episode 1 to 20 of Special Access Podcast had just disappeared. And I had a cold sweat run through me. I've gotten over it now, but it took a few days. I lost a good year's work of my life. And as my podcast is plagued by sound issues and my inexperience with audio production, but I could always, as bad as my podcast could get, at times I always maintained I had one of the best guest lists in the business. But now that guest list has all but been wiped, I've got to start again pretty much to build it up.
Oh, wow. So you don't have those old episodes archived anywhere?
I have 4. I have Jonathan Davies, Scott Brown, and a second Tim McMillan, and Mick West. And I have those still on my memory card, thankfully, and I'll be starting to release those within the next week, maybe one a week. But other than that, no, the rest are gone. I've reached out to a couple of people hoping there'd be a copy lying around, but no, they're gone. So I've accepted it and moved on at this point.
Well, I think that's really all you could do, but there may be a couple of places for you to retrieve those archives. And one of them is your subscriber base. If anybody's on iTunes and they've downloaded those files, then those MP3 files could still be available on their desktop. And so maybe make a special request to your listener base and see if anybody has those files and send them to you via Dropbox or something. The other spot that you could look is the archive.org. It's archive.org, and those files might be there, man.
It never even occurred to me to check the archive.org, to be honest. Yeah, I will. I'll check that out. Fingers crossed.
Good luck with that, man. That's terrible because, like you said, and as I said, I'm a fan of your podcast, and one of the reasons is because of the guest list. You know, you've had some of the most influential names, most well-known people in the UFO community. And one person who I'm actually kind of stunned that he was your second guest. I think he was the second or third guest on your podcast. Let me just double check. No, he was your third guest. He was your third episode, John McAfee.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The inception of the podcast actually started a bit with John McAfee. When I was in the planning stages for this podcast, it was before a case of whether I knew I'd even start it or not. It was before then. And I saw John McAfee put a tweet out on Twitter, obviously, saying, if you want me to be on your podcast, please email my wife. And then it gave the email address. And I thought, well, that's a sign. I'd love to be able to speak to John McAfee. That'd be a great first guest. I'll reach out. And then almost straight away, he got back to me.
That's fantastic, man.
I look back on that interview. I haven't listened to it since it came out, and I can't listen to it came out. That interview still survives on YouTube, by the way. I will re-upload that.
Oh, very cool.
But I look back on that interview and cringe very hard.
So, I don't know if you know this or not, but there is a list, an existing list of your podcast on a website called listennotes.com.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, listennotes.com, and just do a search for your podcast. It'll bring up the entire archive list. It's not the episodes, I don't think. Well, let me just see if I can. I'll play one right now and see if it works. Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't because the source file is gone. But it has the list, the content, the description of the episodes. So, I mean, that'll be a little bit of help for you, I think.
So since the start of last month, when I realized that I've lost my guest list, I've been working quite hard to rebuild it, and I think I'm interviewing at a much faster rate now than I was before. But I'm just not releasing. I'm releasing at the same rate. So I've got those 4 to re-release. I've got another 2 to release, brand new ones, and yeah, I'm just falling behind with the editing. Minute.
I know the feeling, man. I have a backlog of approximately, well, I've whittled it down to about 10 episodes that are still either partially edited or not even touched, but recorded and ready to go out. Yeah. So I did some really heavy editing a few months ago, and then that was before I started the YouTube channel. Since I started the YouTube channel, I've been getting really busy, so those pre-recorded audio only episodes are still waiting to be edited and published. Go ahead.
What made you make the switch from audio only to a YouTube live stream?
Well, I didn't make the switch completely. What I did was I decided to since I was doing my recordings via Zoom anyway, so I was seeing my guest, I thought about trying that on a live stream, and it worked out. But with Zoom, it was real clunky. It was really hard to do with Zoom.
Hmm.
So I tried out some live streaming platforms, and there's a couple out there, StreamYard, and the one that I settled on was Melon app. But I figured, I could turn this into the recording process of the podcast into a live stream and let listeners, if they want to, ask questions via the chat window and let people get an early access, because like I said, I do have that backlog, and waiting, I sometimes feel really guilty about, I've recorded those episodes back in December and I still haven't put them out yet. So I feel pretty, kind of guilty about not getting those episodes out sooner. So this is why I started doing it via YouTube.
Cut out the middleman of having to edit and then release. It's a really good idea. Yeah.
It definitely cuts down my editing because, it's live, so everybody sees every mistake anyway. Mm-hmm. So I just take out the audio, publish it as a podcast, and it's a new episode on the podcast.
Yeah, editing really takes it out of me. I find it very grueling to sit there and listen back to myself being inane more often than not, I like to think.
I totally get it, man. And to me, I'm have a focus on detail that it takes me 2 to 3 times as long to edit as it did to record. So if I have a 2-hour recording, it could sometimes take me 4 to 6 hours to edit that. Yeah, and it is, talk about grueling. I mean, I don't have a problem. I enjoy the editing process, but it's still, it just takes a long time to do it. So when you have other things going on doing that editing, it starts to back up, starts to pile up, and that's why I say I got a backlog. So first of all, one of the coolest things that I dig about your podcast is the name of your podcast.
Thank you.
Special Access Podcast. That is super creative, man. You took an area of ufology that was at one time little known. Almost nobody had ever heard of special access projects. And you took that and turned it added, instead of the P being project, you turned it into podcast. I think that's brilliant, honestly. I love it.
Thank you. I can't, although I did come up with it, I can't take too much credit. It was a case of, I was just sitting there, what can I call this thing? What can I call this thing? And then it was the first name that popped into my head, Special Access Program. How about Special Access Podcast? And awesome. Then since I thought of that, there was no reason to keep thinking. I was like, that's the name. It has to be. I think one of my worries is I backed myself into a bit of a UFO corner with the name and definitely the content that I've been producing over the last year. I've got a lot more varied interests than just UFOs, but the way it worked out at the start of the podcast, I was really into UFOs at the time, and I still am. But it's sort of one guest led to the next. It just had a chain reaction where I've only had UFO people on, but I want to start getting people like Whitney Webb and these not political commentators as such, but I'm very interested in real conspiracies. So I'd like to get a couple of conspiracy-minded, maybe UFO researchers on to begin with. But I am looking to expand my content.
Jay Widener is a pretty big conspiracy commentator, isn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yes, he is. Yeah, we spoke mostly about UFO issues when I spoke to him, but he agreed to come back on again, and our focus is going to be his Stanley Kubrick analysis. Yeah. Those films, I love those films.
Yeah.
Right up my alley, those things are.
Yeah, he's done some really interesting analysis on those. I think the guy has a very unique way of looking at the film industry. I don't agree with 100% of what he does, but I think he just has a really interesting way of breaking those films down and finding something in there that I don't think very many other people would even realize was in those films.
Yeah, agreed. I certainly wouldn't have I certainly wouldn't have realized without those films. Yeah.
Yeah. So the the focus of the podcast is primarily UFOs, but and again, your guest list is amazing.
Thank you.
But what other areas do you, you mentioned conspiracies, but besides conspiracies and UFOs, because those are kind of almost interlinked.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Hmm.
What other areas would you like to go into to explore?
Well, definitely conspiracies, UFOs, conspiracies. I like the occult symbology in things like in movies, things like that. More of the same of the Stanley Kubrick stuff that Jay Weidner does, but people like Jay Dyer, who's written some excellent books about symbology in Hollywood. Whitney Webb is somebody I've been trying to get on the podcast for almost the last year. She's a political commentator who deals with. She's a specialist in DARPA, but all sorts of other things. So the so yeah, things like DARPA, conspiracies. Yeah, just general fringe topics, but without going too fringe. I flat Earth will not get a look in, if you get my meaning. I like real conspiracies, true conspiracies, but I like the weirder parts of true conspiracies, stuff like the coincidences of 9/11, things like that.
Yeah, I do a little bit of exploration into the remote viewing
Too.
field. I think that's just super fascinating, and the stuff that they've done with it and the stuff that they're doing with it now. Really, really interesting stuff. That's one of my areas outside of ufology. And I mean, if you've listened to some of my earlier podcasts, you know I started out with the history of the Cold War. That quickly led into the connection between ufology or the UFO phenomena and the conflict between the Soviet Union and the U.S. I mean, it seems like there's so much related. And then there was the cover up by the U.S. government, and and then it seems like that cover up instantly went worldwide with UFO sightings and possible crashes inside of Germany, Soviet Union, and all that stuff. So it was a natural progression for me to go into the exploration or the looking into UFOs. But what was it that started you down that rabbit hole? I don't really want to call it a rabbit hole, but it kind of is because it can branch off into many different areas. What was it that started you in the area of UFOs?
Whilst I don't remember where the initial inkling came from, I do remember when my beliefs started to change. The Peter Levander book, and of course we all know Peter Levander's name from the TTSA initiative over the last few years. But before TTSA was ever a thing, Peter Levander was my favorite author. I've read nearly every book he's written, but particularly the trilogy Sinister Forces had a deep impact on my life. I consider almost an initiatory experience. And for those who haven't read Sinister Forces, it's a retelling of some of the major events in history, assassinations, etc. It's a rewriting of those, but from an occult perspective. So it's Sinister Forces, a grimoire of American political, etc., whatever the name is. So in Sinister Forces, which a book that changed my life in many different ways, he spends quite a bit of time dealing with UFOs, and the rest of the book really piqued my interest and gave me a lot of other paths to go down the rabbit hole. But in the UFO chapter, he mentions John Keel. So I read the Mothman prophecies from sinister forces. And since reading the Mothman prophecies, my beliefs in UFOs really started to change. And from there, I started devouring anything I could read. I started listening to the radio shows and the podcasts, and my beliefs in it really changed. And then, of course, a few years later, Peter Levander comes out with Tom DeLonge, of all people. Who saw this one coming? Saying that they're writing a non-fiction trilogy about UFOs and that the game is going to change. So from that second on, I was hooked on the TTSA story.
I read the first book in that, Secret Machines. What was the subtitle on that one?
God's Man and War.
Yeah. And I thought that was a fantastic novel. I read the first one cover to cover within, probably a week. And I'm a slow reader. It usually takes me months, and I usually don't finish a book. But I knocked that one out pretty quick. Although it was a fiction, they kind of said that it may or may not be based on factual.
That was the Chasing Shadows book. That was
Right.
A.J. Hartley wrote that. The one I'm talking about is the non-fiction one, Gods, written by Peter Levander.
Okay.
What I found so disconcerting would be the word, is how the information in God's Man and War, how the information sat very nicely with Peter Levander's other body of work. So Peter's done he's done a book on the Masons. He's done several books on H.P. Lovecraft. All of these things, all of these different threads that Peter Levander spent his career mapping out, then later appear in the TTSA manifesto. I found this deeply, deeply worrying, and more than a little suspicious of TTSA's motives. As much of a fan of, I wouldn't say fan, as much of a follower of their plan that I am.
Yeah, would you like to expound on that? Or did you, I noticed one of your earliest episodes was about TTSA. Did you talk about that in that episode?
I did. I was highly critical of TTSA in that. Some things I was critical of that they've come to backtrack on or change, but it was the stuff like the balloon behind the Chris Mellon photo, the photo of the balloon behind Chris Mellon. There's the different gaffes they made along the way. I can't think of them to my mind at the minute, but it was one. Tom DeLonge appearing on Joe Rogan is a great example of a gaffe that they made that really helped lose my supportership for TTSA.
Yeah, that does seem to be the beginning of the end for the relationship between Tom DeLonge and basically the rest of the team. Although is Peter Levander still with TTSA?
I believe so. I haven't heard anything otherwise, and they still have the third book in the series to release, War.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about that that concern that you can pinpoint? I don't want to put you on the spot. I know this is a cold discussion, but I'm really curious to kind of pick your brain about that.
Yeah, sure. I'm just seeing if I can find the list that I made.
And while you're doing that, I'll just expound a little bit. I've heard since they first came out in 2017, I believe it was, with the videos and the New York Times article. There have been people that have been highly critical of the TTSA for one reason or another. I mean, some of it was almost so minute and just nitpicky. It seemed trivial, but there were some more serious concerns. So I'm just curious what some of the concerns were that you had.
Yeah, I can't find my list, so I can't remember exactly what what all of my objections with TTSA were, but it was stuff like or carefully choosing which media outlets to go on. For is a good example. Like at the start, it was Fade to Black with Jimmy Church, and George Knapp had been chosen as well. And that was a practice that didn't really seem to let up until Lou Elizondo left. And as we both know, Lou has been doing the rounds of the UFO Twitter podcasts
Yeah,
a lot.
he has been doing a lot of appearances, and uh, it was just a little weird that there was almost no presence at all for TTSA for so long. Then um, Lou and Chris and Steve Justice left, and now Lou is just on every podcast that's out there. It seems like.
Mhm. Will you be talking to him?
Oh, I don't have any plans to. I haven't
No.
tried to reach out to him yet, but no, I've got uh, I've got quite a few. Like I said, man, I've got a backlog of episodes I got to get out still. I've got scheduled uh, interviews coming up that are already stretching out into uh, April. And so, yeah, I wasn't planning on reaching out to him anytime soon. And I figured by the time I had an opening to get him in, he would probably start to back off of the. I mean, he's already said so much on everybody else's episode or podcast.
That's exactly my thinking. I haven't reached out to him either, and to be honest, I don't know what I can add to the conversation that 10 other podcasters haven't already done by now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
another reason am quite critical of TTSA is the staff list when they first announced themselves were all CIA and counterintelligence officers. Again, that's the conspiracy theorist in me, but it's I'm not overly trustful of such a dark job role list.
Yeah, fair. I mean, that's a fair concern. And I can't defend them against that kind of an issue because I don't know them personally. So I'm not trying to take a stand for or against those guys because I really haven't had any interactions with them myself. Although I did meet Sean Cahill and he was on one of my episodes, but he was not really with TTSA early on, but him and Lou seem to have a pretty close relationship now that Lou's no longer with TTSA. So I got to keep going back to my questions here,
sure.
And this is the part that gets hard about doing live streams. So with we talked about your guests, and they're very knowledgeable in the fields that they're in. Can you point to one of the guests or any of the guests that you learned something that was the most interesting thing to you?
Instantly I'd need to look over my previous guest list, but what first comes to mind is the Steve Mera episode. I'm a big fan of Steve Mera, but he gave me, it wasn't so much an interview as he gave me a little impromptu lecture as we were doing the interview. So I sat and listened to him talk to me for 2 hours, but he gave me this stunning talk on what him and another guest of mine, Barry Fitzgerald, referred to as Project Doorway. And he spent some time on apports and magnetic field anomalies and how they can, and the scientific research they're doing into these things. And that was a really eye-opening interview for me. And I think my focus shifted from the nuts and bolts on that episode to the stranger aspects of the phenomenon, with apports and synchronicities, consciousness. I think, although I've always maintained that these are part of the phenomenon, my research focus definitely changed a lot from that episode.
That's interesting to hear that, because um, I'm kind of like that too, where I started out looking at the nuts and bolts part of it, and pretty quickly, early on, I realized that there's way more to it than these things just being spaceships. Because people are having like experiences that include psychic abilities, contact, or not only contact but communications with the entities that are supposedly driving these craft. I mean, there's way more to it than just the nuts and bolts of it. And so for people focusing on only that, there are people who really know their stuff, and that's really what they're into. But I think the study of this phenomena is way more inclusive than just the nuts and bolts of it.
Absolutely. I've sort of had this point slapped in my face over the past month or so. And you were involved in a way with by having Grant Cameron on. It's a it's a bit of a long story, but it traces all the way back to the early part of December. I don't know if you saw the UFO panel on Spaced Out Radio with Grant Cameron, Nicole Sackich, Tim McMillan,
Yes.
and all those people. Yeah, well, at the end of that, Nicole Sackich asks Tim McMillan about his background and whether or not he's a possible disinfo agent. And I thought to myself, fair play, she's asking the big questions. I'd never heard of her before. It's Grant Cameron's research assistant, Nicole is. Within that panel on Spaced Out Radio, Rich Giordano of GoofOn was also in the chat. And I was aware of GoofOn, but around the same time I started watching it, as I'd heard them on the chat on Spaced Out Radio. So on GoofOn, just really coincidentally, out of the blue, he plays this video about, he plays this guy called Timothy Wiley, who's this wizened guy. He's got long grey hair and a long grey beard, this wizard-looking fellow. And he's talking about seeing UFOs and angels whilst taking ketamine. My talk's about to take a bit of a turn here, so I apologize. So he GoofOn, Rich Giordano plays this video completely out of the blue, and I text it to my friend because the night before we had been talking about ketamine, and he had been trying to convince me to do some for his birthday. So I sent this video to my friend, and he says, "No way, that's the guy I was trying to tell you about last night. I just couldn't think of the words. I couldn't describe him, but that's him." I was like, "No way, I just saw this guy on GoofOn today. That's the weirdest thing." So that was my friend Mike, who we started reading the book True Hallucinations by Terence McKenna. We started reading it on the same day, just coincidentally, but that's part of another tapestry of coincidence. So at around this time, whilst just shortly after the UFO panel on SOR and me watching GoofOn, I was getting out of the shower, and I was drying my hair. I had my eyes closed, and this sounds a bit weird, and I'm not usually prone to these sort of beliefs, but I had a flash. I had a flash come into my head whilst my eyes were closed of the book The Messengers, Owls, Synchronicity, and UFOs by Mike Cleland, a book I'd read sometime in the past and I'd always very influenced by, but it just popped into my head for no reason. And I hadn't been thinking about him. We hadn't been talking about him, but there it was, clear as day. And I thought I should message Mike to be a guest on the podcast. So this was on New Year's Eve. So I had the flash in the shower. I messaged Mike to be a guest, and I went about my night. So this was on New Year's Eve, and the same friend that I was talking about ketamine with, we were taking acid later that night, and we were talking about how we always hear acid when we take psychedelics, and I told my partner about the Flash of the Owl book that I had in the shower. So that was whilst we were walking, and we did hear owls as that was happening. We got back at about half past midnight, and I had had a message off Mike Cleland that came through at 5 past midnight saying, yes, I'll happy to be a guest on your show. That sounds great. So I was pretty pleased with it. I took a day or two maybe to reply to Mike saying, thank you for being a guest. Can't wait to talk to it. Can't wait to talk to you. I had no reply. I waited a week. I messaged him again, no reply again. I thought, well, that's weird. I'll just forget it for now. I've got other guests on the horizon. I'll focus my time on them. So some time went by, and just out of the blue, the thought occurred to me, Mike Cleland gave me his Skype in that original email that he messaged me, that he sent to me. I'll try his Skype. So I got his Skype handle, messaged him, and I got a reply straight away. Yep, happy to be a guest. Sorry I didn't get back in touch sooner. When can we do this? So we set up a date and time right there, and I was feeling pretty damn pleased with the whole affair. And then the next day, I was just mindlessly surfing around YouTube, literally just about to close my laptop, and I saw Nicole Sakic from the start of this story had who appears regularly on GoofOn, by the way. I forgot to say she's a watcher of GoofOn. That's how I came to know her name. She posted a video that night. That same night I had talked to Mike, she had posted a video of her, Grant Cameron, and Grant's other assistant talking to Mike Cleland, the same Mike Cleland who I'll be having on. And I was gobsmacked. My jaw hit the floor, and to be honest, I'm still reeling from it a little bit. So that was the main coincidence. Grant had posted that video the day after I had set up the interview with Mike. And I only set up that interview with Mike because of a psychic owl flash I had in the shower. So that was crazy. But as I was putting it all together, I realized it stretched back much further, and it involved Nicole Sakic, Grant Cameron, Rich Giordano, and yourself, because at around this time, you also had Grant Cameron on. And in that interview, he talks about his psychedelics book, and I didn't know this book existed. So I was like, that's what I was supposed to hear. That's the thing I'm supposed to talk to Grant about. And I spoke to Grant middle of this week. And at the end of it, he's agreed to come back on the podcast to discuss his psychedelic books, but he's going to send me a copy first.
Cool.
So if you could have told me 5 years ago that Grant Cameron would be sending me a book on psychedelics for me and him to discuss, I just wouldn't have believed you at all.
Yeah.
But so yeah, it's an incredible chain of coincidences for me that I probably didn't do well describing here. There's a sort of a dreamlike quality to synchronicities. It's like retelling a dream, if you know what I mean.
I get what you're talking about. I think the consciousness and the synchronicity part of it is really important. And when you start to become aware of what's going on around you and what's related to this phenomena, then things start to fall into place in weird ways. And it, anybody looking at it that doesn't really have an understanding of it is going to say, oh, that's just a coincidence. Yeah, but when you have 5, 10, 20 coincidences in a row related to the same thing, that's really a little bit more than just coincidence, right?
Yeah, and it really is world-shattering stuff, because, as you say, the odds are too much for it to just be a straight coincidence. But then I come to the thought, well, then what does it mean? What am I missing? Am I getting all the main parts here? So psychedelics are definitely something to do with it, but are owls just the signposts that I need to follow, or are they part of the terrain itself?
I think there definitely is some kind of a connection with owls. And I think it was Grant that told me that there was a connection with owls, and it's because that maybe sometimes they appear as something. They're extraterrestrials that appear as something else. Uh, I can't remember exactly what he said about that, but it was something along those lines.
Is he talking about owls as screen memories? So a lot of
Right.
experiencers and abductees will report seeing 5 foot owls out of their car windshield, or these crazy stories with driving 50 miles an hour down the road and there's an owl keeping pace with them with its neck craned looking in the car. These crazy stories that can't be real owls. But people have these memories anyway. But when they dig into them years later, they say by a hypnotherapist, it's like, oh, that's not an owl. It's a little grey man with a slit for a mouth and two big eyes. They describe the classic grey. So it comes back to what, in my mind, it comes back to what Grant says as well about the theory of wow. These stories are meant to be crazy enough for you to retell, and just the sheer fact it's weird enough sticks in your mind, and
Yeah.
the memories are there for us to recall. It's there to let us know something happened. Screen
Yeah.
memories.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was saying that if it's just so mundane that you wouldn't even think twice about it, then it doesn't have an impact. But these beings, or whatever they are, entities, they want us to be aware of them for some reason.
Hmm.
And, I mean, it's a theory. It is a theory because there's really no definitive evidence to point to that's proves that as a fact. But it's an interesting theory,
Hmm.
and it certainly makes you look at this from a different perspective, and that's what's important. If you are willing to be uh, flexible enough to look at things from a different perspective, you're going to learn from the exploration of these topics.
Hmm.
And I think that's what's important. I think the pursuit of knowledge is something that I've always found my main motivation to be. And when I start having questions answered, but at the same time more questions arising from that, I feel like I'm on the right path.
Hmm.
Is that true with you as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. This whole synchronicity thing has given me 10 different threads to follow at the minute. So I've got Grant Cameron's book. Whenever I get that, I will be digging into that on the podcast. Um, I would like to have a guest on to talk about synchronicities. Maybe not a UFO guest, but this is part of what I was talking about, where I'd like to sort of make it just a slight left turn from the UFO topic, but stay within the general area. So I would like to have someone on to talk about synchronicities and maybe dig into all this a bit with me. I will definitely have some people on to explore the consciousness and psychedelic side of the UFO experience.
Well, the dude that you need to talk to about synchronicities is John Tenney.
Yes, I've been
If you
trying to
could
get
get him.
John Tenney on for the better part of a year. I get no response. Anyway,
uh,
I've been trying hard. John, if you're
it,
listening, I'd love to talk.
um, and I noticed on your recent list, Micah Hanks.
Hmm.
Is he? Is he? Does he know John Tenney?
Not that I know of. I would, yeah. You know what? Probably they're both in Hellier, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
I was thinking that he might be able to put in a word for you. Or, do you have his contact
um,
info?
who's that now?
Tenney.
No, no, I don't know. I've been trying public websites, public email addresses, and Twitter.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, good luck with that. That would be an interesting conversation because I don't think there's a lot of content out there with him doing appearances, is there?
Mm. No, not that I know of. No, I'd love to speak to him.
Yeah.
I love the way he does things. I should also say I mentioned that guy that Gufon played. He took that guy talking about UFOs and ketamine. and angels and ketamine. His name was Timothy Wiley, and he was a founding member of the Process Church of the Final Judgment, and they are heavily featured in the Peter Levander trilogy, Sinister Forces, and have quite a few shady dealings throughout history, like their involvement in the Manson family, which seems to have been largely covered up. So that's just another example of one of a gobsmacking synchronicity. I didn't even realize that the first couple of times I saw the ketamine guy. It was only later he showed his Process Church ID. I was like, oh my God, that's ridiculous. I'm here because of Sinister Forces, and this guy plays such a heavy part in the book Sinister Forces. Yeah.
What is ketamine? I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, I was unsure as whether to tell this story in full or not, because it's a horse tranquilizer, apparently.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it's a psychedelic as well, and yeah, we hadn't done it in quite some time, and it was only the past few months, after quite a few years. My friend, it was his birthday, as I said, my friend Mike, he convinced me to do it again. And and that Timothy Wiley video, I was like, well, I sort of have to do it now.
Are you an experiencer? Have you ever seen a UFO?
I had some very weird dreams as a kid, where if I had some very strange dreams as a kid, but I count them as dreams because I never had anything like it since. But I read Sinister Forces, and I was researching the UFO topic before I ever actually saw a UFO. But I have experienced the UFO maybe 5 years ago on a plane, as myself and my partner were traveling from. We live in Wales, but my family live in Ireland, so we were traveling from Wales to Ireland, just making our descent into Dublin. And I look out the right hand. I was sitting in the window seat. I look out the window. I thought, oh, the moon looks very full tonight. That's what it's lovely. It looked massive. It looked milky white. That's beautiful. I said to my partner, I was like, look at the moon. Like, look how lovely it looks. So I pull my head back from the window, and she sticks hers out. She's like, oh yeah, and then puts her head straight back. So I go back to looking out, and I look at it a bit more, and I realize there's no detail on it. It's just completely milky white. And I said to her, that's not the moon. I turned and said, that's not the moon. She's like, I know. She had a scared look in her face. She's like, I know that's not the moon. So I continue looking at it, and I watch it get smaller and smaller, and not moving away smaller, like shrinking to nothing. And I watched it shrink to nothing and then go out. And I thought, well, that was weird. We've just seen a UFO. I said, saying to my partner. So we landed, my parents picked us up, and I was recounting this story. And do you know what? It kicks me that I never asked anybody else on the plane if they had seen anything.
Yeah.
But we landed. I was recounting the story to my parents, and I explained I'd seen it. It was milky white, looked just like the moon. And my partner said, it wasn't milky white. I saw it as orange. So in the time it took me to pull my head back and for her to look out and put her head back, it was changing color. Or was it always orange for her to look at, or milky white for me to look at? That really didn't jive in my head. It doesn't jive in my head. But that's the only thing I can look at and say, yes, we definitely saw a UFO that night.
Were you scared?
No, I was thrilled. I was happy to have seen one. It was a confirmation. It was a strong confirmation for me.
Yeah, definitely. The idea that two people in the same location looking at the same object can see two different things, that's not uncommon. Mm-hmm. That's something that happens, especially with the phenomena. They for some reason they'll see two completely different things, or slightly different details about the phenomena. It's just a really strange part of that whole thing.
A friend of the show, Jonathan Davies, and he's a previous guest as well. He lives here in Wales, not too far from me. He is an experiencer, and he's been seeing very strange things for some years now. But he has a theory that the lights, the different color of the orbs, is some sort of communication tool by them. So if, because I saw it milky white and my partner saw it orange, like maybe the orange is like, stop looking, this isn't an event for you, please don't watch. And then it's milky white for me because I was supposed to see it. I was supposed to sit there and watch it fade to nothing. Maybe it was my own personal confirmation event that my partner wasn't supposed to witness. So when she looked at it, it was like, it was orange. No, stop looking, back away.
Yeah.
These are just some of the thoughts I've had.
So I have to ask this for people that are may not believe that what you saw was a real sighting.
Mm-hmm.
Were you on any kind of hallucinogenics at the time?
No, I
Yeah.
was I was dead sober, traveling on a plane to meet my parents of all people. So
Yeah, you
no,
did say that you got off and went straight to talk to your parents.
yeah.
If you were high, that would have
No,
been.
if I see anything strange and I've taken hallucinogenics, I just wouldn't tell anybody. I've seen strange things on hallucinogenics, but I don't think I've seen a UFO or an alien. I think I was tripping and I just saw it, a hallucination.
Cool.
I want to just
Yeah.
make it clear as well that I'm not some mad. Clear for the listeners that I'm not some crazy drug taker. It's recreational / spiritual is the reason I take psychedelics, and I'm only really finding it again in my older age. I partied a lot as a kid, as a teenager, and then I was clean and dead sober for 10, 15 years. And I think now my exploration of psychedelics is progressing again. And this is when the coincidences started taking off.
Good. I appreciate you saying that. No judgment from me whatsoever.
No, of course.
So sometimes I'll ask questions that I feel like the audience might want to know, and it's by no means me judging what you're telling me. I believe what you're telling me, and I've never had an experience like that. I've never seen a UFO. I've never even seen a strange light in the sky. I've always figured, okay, I can see a light up there. It's moving in a straight line. It's probably a satellite, something like that. The coolest thing that I've seen in the night sky is the Starlink chain of satellites. That was really impressive. But again, that's man-made. Nothing spectacular. Anybody could see that at any time.
What brought you to the UFO topic then, if you've never had a sighting?
So it's something that I've had a passing interest in for quite a while, but not really delved into it. And I was a non-believer. I just thought, okay, maybe people are just imagining it. And I literally, I've had this conversation with people in my family that I would explain it away because they either saw something they misidentified, or they imagined something, or they want attention for some reason, or they're just a crazy person. But in my mind, I just would explain it away as something that was not unexplainable. Not that I didn't believe that there was life out there in the universe besides us. I've always felt that there was life beyond our planet. I just didn't believe people were actually experiencing contact with these beings from other. But then in 2015, maybe it was a little bit earlier than that, I read the book Hunt for the Skinwalker by George Knapp and Colm Kelleher.
Classic.
That changed my mind completely because it was science-based. The witnesses were pragmatic, rigorous thinkers, serious people, not people prone to flights of fancy or imagination. These were serious critical thinkers, and they were seeing the weirdest things, and there was no explanation for it. And some of the things that they saw, it was mind-blowing. So that book is what changed my mind about believing in the phenomena, or the the multiple phenomena that we have in our world. And then a couple of years later, when that New York Times article hit the news, and that's when I really started to talk about it with other people. But I didn't start digging into it and doing my own research until I started the podcast, and my research into the history of the Cold War and the effects of the Cold War on our society. And I started finding those connections with the UFO subject. That's when I started to really look into it. And, I'm not a big researcher when it comes to the UFO topic. I think there's some cases that are really interesting and worthy of study. But I'm not like Richard Dolan has done so much important work. Grant Cameron, those guys of that level that have been doing this work for decades. I'm not going to try to come in and on the heels of those guys and try to find something that they didn't. I'll look at their work, and if I get an opportunity to talk to them on the podcast like I did with Grant, that's where my research begins.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's kind of the how my exploration in the UFO topic came about.
I like to say that I'm not a researcher. I'm not an academic. I'm not a quote unquote real researcher. I'm a podcaster, and that as you say, the research begins on the show. I've asked a guest on because they've written about or they have specialties in whatever area of interest I have that week or month. Yeah, it's as I said at the beginning, it's a very personal mission for me. It's not about listener numbers or followers. It's about it's about recording conversations with these people who I've been listening to for years. I've been listening to Grant Cameron for at least 5 years. And to be able to, I had this string of synchronicities, and I thought, well, yes, I've got the podcast. To have a platform to be able to delve into some of my areas of interest in is the best thing in the world. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I agree, because it seems like I would give these guys the benefit of the doubt and say that they would probably respond to an email, or maybe even pick up the phone and have a conversation with me one-on-one. But having that platform and the opportunity for them to come and spread their message to a potentially new audience is compelling enough for them to take a meeting with somebody that they've never even met, right, or never even heard of. So yeah, it has opened up doors for me, as I'm sure. I mean, obviously it has, because you've talked with like people like MJ Benias, Tim McMillan, who, those guys are so busy that they're not going to pick up the phone most likely and talk to a reader or a fan of their work, because they're putting out so much content. That's what they do. They put out content. So unless they have an opportunity to put that content out and get that message out to multiple people, then it's not in their best interest to spend the time talking to one-on-one people.
I think I got lucky as well, because maybe I got lucky with the first couple of guests, Stephen Bassett, Jay Widener, but as I got these bigger names, the subsequent people I would contact, it was easier to get them maybe to agree, because I can say, well, I've had these other great minds on as well. So people are like, okay, yeah, maybe I'll go on too. So a lot of it was blind luck, I think. A lot of
no,
it
you're right. Work. You get a couple of names that people recognize, and it makes it easier for other people to agree to come on the show. Absolutely. I've experienced the same thing.
When I messaged Grant Cameron, I told him the bullet points version of my synchronicity story, and he was more than happy to come on and discuss that with me. That was great. Yeah. I didn't have to massage him too much at all.
No, his mind is amazing to me, because he has such amazing recall, and he talks so fast. He's just, it's like an information dump to talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
And you really want to have your questions ready to go so that when he comes on the podcast, you can try to guide the conversation with him, but he's going to take it in whatever direction he wants to anyway.
I said to my partner, it's like trying to harness a tornado. You just say one thing, it sets him off spinning. It's fantastic. I mean, I asked him my first question, a pretty inane question. What's your background? What led you here? Blah, blah, blah. But he spent the 35, 40 minutes answering me. And then the rest of the interview was just left with my notes. In that 40-minute answer, I was making notes. And then just return to them, ask them a question, another 15-minute answer, 10-minute answer. But I didn't actually work off my carefully prepared question sheet at all for Grant. It was fantastic.
I'm going to change directions a little bit here because I want to ask you about some of the recent things that have been happening in the UFO world. Do you have what are your expectations, or what would you like to see come out of the 180-day report from the UAPTF?
Well, I want to see nothing less than disclosure, to be honest. Yeah. No, I kid. I'm joking. I don't know what to expect from this bill. I think it's going to be a lot of nothing, if I'm honest. I spoke to Micah about it, and he helped me understand what it was a bit. Because from the outside, from here in the UK, looking in, for me, it was boggling how a COVID relief bill became entangled with the release of some UFO files. It makes no sense. Micah did explain it somewhat for me. But from the outside looking in, all I'm expecting is the declassification or the release of some files that we already knew about. I don't think we're going to see anything earth-shattering from it.
It would be cool to see some photos or additional videos. My expectations are it's probably going to be mostly boring information, and you're going to have some people like John Greenwald pick it apart. And but what I'm hoping for is that it will open up some loose ends that people like John Greenwald or Rich Dolan can then do their magic and dig deeper and get additional information out of the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. Because it really seems like that there's not a lot of information. Although I could be mistaken, man. I mean, they could come out and just blow our minds, and that would be amazing.
I personally don't see it. The UK had its own sort of disclosure initiative a year, maybe 2 years ago. The MOD released apparently all of their files, and there was nothing of substance in there. I'm expecting pretty much the same, but we'll see. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic nonetheless.
Yeah, it goes back to what Luis Jimenez kept saying, is that my expectations are low. That way I hopefully don't get disappointed. Now, with that, I'm going to open it up. If anybody watching has any questions, if there was some people watching earlier, I don't know if we put them to sleep talking about consciousness or what.
Yeah, it was the mention of psychedelics that sent them scampering,
running for the hills.
Yeah.
But if anybody out there has questions, please drop them in the chat, and we will answer them for sure. I did have a friend on Facebook who is a local member of the Nevada MUFON, and he went up to the black mailbox near Area 51, and he captured a video. And I'll pull it up here in a little bit. If he's still on, if he's still watching, then maybe I'll have him jump on with us and explain what he saw.
Yeah,
because it's an interesting video, but I can't really tell what's on there. So maybe he could tell us a little bit more. So what are you, I mean, you kind of already answered the question, but the goals for your podcast, like what's the long game that you would like to accomplish with the podcast?
Well, there is no long game. It's yeah, it's a long-term thing, and my ultimate, to be honest, one of my ultimate goals is to talk to Peter Levander. I think the podcast may it could end after that, with me perfectly happy. But yeah, I've got a couple of people on my bucket list of names that I'd really love to talk to, and I'm hoping that with some carefully worded emails, now that I've had some bigger names on, that they'll fall in line, or at least reply. But yeah, apart from talking, there's some guests I really want to have on. Apart from talking to them, I have no goals other than to just keep putting out episodes and getting better. I want to refine my interview techniques, and I want to become better at producing and hosting a podcast.
Yeah, those are good goals. Because we all start out somewhere. You have to start out somewhere, and hopefully we learn from our mistakes and improve the production quality. That's a good goal. So you said Levander. You've already connected with Grant. Give me a couple more of those people on your
dream
wish
guess. Whitney Webb, who I've mentioned a couple of times. She's not really a UFO head, but her. Richard Dolan, Linda Moulton Howe. I can't think of many more off the top of my head, but there's a bucket list of people who I would love to. Oh, Joseph P. Farrell. I must have emailed him a bunch of times. I've emailed him so many times, but I would love to speak to him. I've read a lot of his books, and I think he's the man. I said I would like to take my podcast in a slightly different direction away from UFOs, and I think he's the man to do it because he's got a very varied research background.
I'm not familiar with him. What can you tell me a little bit about him?
Yeah, sure. So he's a writer and researcher he's delved into such things as 9/11 and the Nazi involvement in the occult, as well as Nazi UFOs. He's written a whole series on Nazi occult and UFO beliefs, as has Peter Levander. But yeah, he talks about UFOs, he talks about conspiracies, and he's a fantastic writer and researcher who I have a lot of respect for.
Cool. Do you have any plans, or do you currently use your platform to help push forward anything from disclosure or advocacy for contactees, or so any other goals that you have for the podcast, or agenda that you have for the podcast besides just talking to interesting people?
I always try to sort of slant my podcast towards my skeptical family and friends. So I've got a lot of friends in particular who maybe they're open to the UFO topic, but they don't quite believe it. They don't know enough of the good information. So one of my goals of the podcast is to maybe give them some good information to go on. Get some of the top names, some of the people who can answer these questions to come on, and maybe they can convince them that something's real. Of course, none of my friends and family listen to my podcast, so that doesn't help. But I do like push it if my people pop up in the field that I like and I have some respect for, so I will always push their goals if needed. So Skyhub is a good example. I cannot wait to see what happens with the Skyhub initiative, and Bob McGuire is a friend of the show, so I will do an ad. Excuse me, I won't do an ad, but I'll talk about how much I love Skyhub, or I'll have a guest on to talk about Skyhub. And it's the same with Joel over at UAP Research. He did a very kind thing by hosting my podcast on his website, so I will give a shout out to UAP Research. So I'm all about helping others within the field as much as I can with my small platform.
That's awesome. Yeah, I get that from, I've interviewed other podcasters, including Andy McGrillen from that UFO podcast. You familiar with this podcast? Yeah.
I am, yes, I like Andy.
And his attitude is the same. If there's a project or a movement, an effort that is for the good of the community as a whole, then it's good to talk about it. It's good to bring that up. You mentioned Skyhub. I talk about Skyhub on almost every episode. Another one that I talk about often is the SCU, Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. I think that's a fantastic organization, doing great work, excellent work. And then the one that I recently learned about is the Big Phone Home. I think that's a great initiative, and I want to let as many people know about that as I possibly can. So there are things, and I don't feel like it's a responsibility for somebody who has a podcast to do that. That's just the way that I feel, and I often ask others if they have any interest in doing that, and if they don't, man, there's again, no judgment. It's their platform. They're going to do with it whatever they want to, and I'm not here to disparage anybody.
Andrew, I find it pretty stunning that me and you, people like me and you, can have our own show and channels and platforms these days. I don't know what software you use to edit, but I use Premiere Pro, and I say to my friends all the time, if you wanted this setup that I'm using on Premiere Pro, if you wanted to use that back in the 90s, it would cost upwards of 150 grand more. Right now, I can do it I subscribe to Adobe for 20 quid a month. Yeah. All it takes is a little teaching yourself online, and you can pick up these skills. I think it's astounding.
Well, the one thing that not everybody has is that, the technology is available for anybody to do this. But what sets you and I apart from the masses, that most people who might have a desire to do this, is the actual willingness to step out and make those mistakes, take a risk, and get out there and potentially look like an idiot in front of a bunch of people.
Yeah.
That's the biggest risk that you take by doing something like this. But without that risk, there is no reward. And then the reward is not like, we're not going to be making millions of bucks doing this. There's only one Joe Rogan show. I'm not trying to be Joe Rogan, but
no, Joe Rogan is one of the biggest influences on my podcast. So as you said, I'm not trying to be Joe Rogan. I never will be Joe Rogan, but I do try to follow his model where I make it for myself. I try to make a show I would like to listen to, filled with references I would get and guests I love. I'm not charging a penny for it. I will not charge for it at any point down the line. There's no monetization. I don't have a Patreon. And yeah, Joe Rogan just built it from nothing. He didn't give a damn if anyone was listening, and now it's the biggest podcast in the world. But his producer who helped him start it, Brian Redban, he was a guest on a podcast I listened to by Ari Shafir, one of Joe Rogan's friends, and the episode was called The Podfather, and it was about how Brian Redban helped Joe Rogan start his podcast. But it was that episode of Skeptic Tank, Ari Shafir's Skeptic Tank, that made me start a podcast. That's what made me pull the trigger, was hearing Ari Shafir and Brian Redban talk about it, how it's this new form of guerrilla radio where we control the content. We're our own bosses. I found it very inspiring. I recommend any of your listeners listen to that. Brian Redban, Skeptic Tank.
I've never even heard of it. Honestly, I don't listen to as many podcasts as I used to, because listening to my podcast through the editing process gets me kind of burned out on listening to
Yeah.
podcasts. I still listen to them when I go walking, but not as many as I used to. And yeah, the idea of doing the podcast for personal gain, there's many more things to do that can be considered personal gain than make money. I would be delighted to be able to make money doing this, have some sponsors that I could talk about their products on here. But what my focus is, what my goal is to talk to people that are interesting, help those people get their message out to other people, and just have something creative to do with the skill and the knowledge that I've acquired over the years, put it to good use, and try to do some good with it. So, I think we're very similar minded in our approach to the podcasting.
I think so. Yeah, it's for it's for our personal benefit, and I think that's where the listeners can attach to it. Is we're not doing this with any ulterior motives, or we're not doing this with any other ulterior motives. Our intentions are pure, and I think that gets picked up by the listener. Thank you, F Hull.
I wonder who that is.
Yeah.
There was a couple of other questions in here that from the listeners. If you don't mind, we'll take a few listener questions, and then I'm going to get my friend Bruce on here, and we're going to take a look at that video. Is that cool?
Brilliant. Yes.
Let's
great.
See. Here it is. Have there been a lot of UFO sightings in Wales that you're aware of?
There is a couple I'm aware of. For one, Wales is a hotspot. Wales is lousy with UFO reports, as far as I'm aware. Especially, I live by Cardiff, and we're quite close to the Bristol Channel. But there's a Welsh Roswell that I recommend you look into, and there's a great article about that. And I think it was Shadows of Your Mind, the free online magazine. There's a great article on the Welsh Roswell. I think it was there I read it. And then there's one great sighting. I actually heard Dan from that UFO podcast talk about this with George Knapp when they were on the other week. But there was a sighting by St. Athens, which is in the southwest corner of Wales. There's a military base, and they got a report of a UFO over the Bristol Channel, and they sent a helicopter out, and they managed to pick it up on their helicopter's FLIR camera. It's a bit like the Nimitz video, in that it's FLIR, it's a gun camera, and it was taken by reputable people. So that's a good one to look into. That's St. Athens gun camera footage. You will probably find it with that. And the Welsh Roswell. But other than that, I know there are a lot of Welsh UFO sightings, but I don't know of many enough. I don't know of them enough to speak on them here.
One thing that I would suggest, if you could, or I don't know, they may already have it in their hands, but the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies might be interested in taking a look at that gun camera footage video. If there's enough data to it, then they'll do a research paper on it. They'll study it and put out a peer reviewable paper about that.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can find the link to that quickly.
And thanks for that question.
Yes, thank you.
Let's see. Okay. I'm going to go to that video, grab a hold of it, if I can find it real quick. Now, this is, let's see if I can pull it up somehow. Okay, it only goes full screen for me. So it's a cool video, but let me see if Bruce is still on here, so I'm going to send him the login to get on here so he can join us. And
So how long have you been doing Dead Hand Radio?
I'm almost at 1 year. March 13th
Congratulations.
will be the 1 year. And Bruce, if you take a look in your messenger, I just sent you the link to join the stream. Again, it started out at the beginning of the pandemic because my business hit the wall, and I was falling into a funk. I needed something creative to do, and I had always wanted to start a podcast. A buddy of mine and I had gotten together a few times to record, and it was the stuff we were recording was a different content. It was different content than what I was interested in pursuing. So I just jumped into it, and then I was invited onto somebody else's podcast as a guest. That was a movie review podcast. I realized pretty quick that wasn't something that I was interested in doing a lot of, because there's so many podcasts out there that do movie reviews. Mm-hmm. I was more interested in doing something along the lines that was military related, historical in nature, and the Soviet Union. Man, it's a long story, and yeah. I really don't want to get into all of it.
That's fair. Yeah.
But that's kind of how it started. So
I'd love to have you on my podcast at some point.
We'll talk about that off
Great stuff.
line, for sure. So it looks like Bruce is having a little bit of trouble getting on. I'm going to try one more time to pull up that video, because for some reason it's only showing up as a little tiny video or full screen, and I don't want to share it on full screen because I won't be able to see anything if I do that. Okay, he looks like Bruce is not going to be able to get on with us. Hey, Bruce, do you have that video on YouTube, or is it only on Facebook? Because the Facebook is not allowing me to share the video. Unless I share my Facebook page. I don't want to do that. Okay. Well, we can do it another time then, Bruce. But and I'll send you the link, Dave, so that you can look at the video. Actually, are you on Facebook, Dave?
No, I'm not. I've just got a Twitter account and a dead Instagram account.
Let's see if I can. Yeah, I can't even share it outside of the Facebook platform. So we're kind of stuck. I won't be able to show it to you. It's a cool video. I mean, it was shot out at the Black Mailbox near Rachel, Nevada, which is out by Area 51. Bruce goes up there quite often. And in fact, I went up there with him one night, and that's when I saw the Starlink.
It's being sold, isn't it? The land with the Black Mailbox.
That's true. I don't know if it has completed, if the sale's complete or not, but that there was a buyer for it.
Wow. Lucky Dan.
He says it's on YouTube. If you could send me the link, Bruce, I'll be able to pull it up and we can take a look at it. Okay. He just sent me a message. Let me take a look. There we go.
For that person who asked about the Welsh sightings, check my Twitter. I'll post the gun camera footage on there after this.
What was that, Dave?
For the person who asked about the Welsh UFO sightings, I will post that gun camera footage to my Twitter after we're done here.
Okay. And go ahead and, while I'm pulling up this YouTube, go ahead and give people your contact information.
Sure, you can.
Your podcast channel.
You can follow me on Twitter at D_Logan33. That's the worst Twitter handle in the world. Just search Special Access Podcast and you'll find me. You can follow me on Instagram at Special Access Podcast, and you can send me an email at specialaccesspod@gmail.com or specialaccesspodcast@gmail.com. I got the other one now too. I'm not much of a social media guy. I never have been. I'm having to come to terms with it for the podcast. I really don't like it.
Yeah, social media is really the only way to spread the word about the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm only going to show a couple seconds of this because this is on somebody else's YouTube channel, and I don't want to get flagged for that.
Sure, fair use.
Yeah, so we'll just show a couple seconds of this and get your response. Now, this is a different video than the one that Bruce had showed me earlier tonight, but it's pretty interesting. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, just full screen. There we go.
First of all, I will make this bigger. That should be a little better. Okay, here we go.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, now, is that
That's amazing. No, I can see that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Was it one object or two objects?
Do
you know?
I don't know. That was Bruce's video.
Yeah.
And he did file a report with MUFON for that. Now,
wow, look at that. That's strange. That is mad.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, now so what happened is somebody else took Bruce's video and threw it up on their own YouTube channel. He said it was only one video or one object. So the two flashing lights there was just one object, and it looked like it was hovering.
Yeah,
looked to me like it was hovering. I really wish I could bring him on here to talk about that, but we'll do that in another, because his equipment wasn't able to get him online for some reason. But check out, I don't know, Bruce. How can you and Dave? Well, you know what? Connect with Dave on Twitter.
Please,
Bruce,
please do.
Yeah, let him see your photography, and you guys can communicate offline about that, and maybe you guys can talk at some point. He's a good dude. He's part of the MUFON for Nevada. Yeah, people are talking about the land being sold out there near Area 51, but it's still accessible, at least for the time being. We don't know if that's going to change or not. But
I wonder what they do plan. I just see a comment there by Santa Maria 5248. I wonder what they do plan to do with the land. That's a very good question.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if a hotel went up or something at this rate.
I actually think that George Knapp did a article on it on MysteryWire.com, his new website.
I love Mystery Wire, but it's not available in the UK.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you go to it. You go to mysterywire.com and it says, this service is not currently available in your country. Please try back again soon.
Strange.
Come back again soon. Yeah, it is strange. So yeah,
if anyone have you tried it through a VPN?
That's how I've been on the site, but it's a bit of a pain to go through it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really have any more questions for you. I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people how to listen to your podcast, get in contact with you if they wanted to, which we did. Is there anything else that you would like to mention before we wind this down?
No, nothing I can think of. Listen to my podcast, follow me on social media, and let me know what you think. If you have any recommendations, let me know. I'm open. Yeah. I'm an open guy.
Yeah, no, and I know from experience that Dave is very willing to communicate with people on the Twitter platform. You're not on any other social media platform.
Not yet.
I don't blame you, man. It's a lot. Yeah. I barely use Instagram. I use Facebook and Twitter mostly, but barely use Instagram at all.
Yeah, a UFO casino would be awesome.
That would be perfect, yeah.
Yeah.
The government would be a little up in arms for that one, I think. Yeah, and Bruce's Photo 07 or Photo 7. He's the one that he says that they want to extend the land to keep us off of it. Most likely.
Yeah.
If they could have that whole road out there going out to Rachel, I'm sure they would be all too happy to keep people from peeping out what they're doing.
I just quickly, before we, this whole talk about the black mailbox land being sold reminds me of Ryan Burns, a guest who I had on a couple of shows ago. He owns a ranch out in Skinwalker territory, and he's got some stories about the ranches around him being bought up by what he calls so-called micro-billionaires whose agendas and schemes seem to be a bit shady for buying up the land. I've heard rumors about Stargate airports and things like that, Stargate ports. But
similar to what when you say Stargate or Starport,
Starport, yeah,
reminds me of what Virgin Galactic is doing out in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm, absolutely,
they have a starport out there.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's interesting. I had not heard that. Was that on the program that you and Ryan Burns talked about?
Yeah, we talk about it briefly. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I must have missed that part. That was one of my favorite episodes that you've done so far. He's an interesting dude.
He really is. Yeah, he's got a lot of hands-on experience in the field, that it just can't be beat. Some of the things he writes about. Yeah, I've got a lot of respect for Ryan.
So, since you mentioned that, it brought up another question, and then I'll let you go because it's pretty late there, isn't it? Or is it early in the morning?
4:30 at the minute. 4:30 in the morning.
Minute. Okay. I really appreciate you doing this, man.
Oh, no problem at all. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate that. Appreciate the invitation.
So the question is this: if there was one spot that you could go visit, and whether it's a UFO hotspot, whether it's has nothing to do with ufology or anything else, where would you like to go?
A couple of places, but I'd love to go to Skinwalker territory. I'd love to see what's going down in Utah. But one of the places on my bucket list to go before I die is Prague. I've always wanted to go to Prague and see it was a big city for the alchemists back in the day, and I want to see all their alchemical art and some of the laboratories that are still there.
Very cool.
It's a
So you're
magical city.
you're really into that esoteric knowledge.
More so these days. I got into it through all the esoteric knowledge. I went nuts and bolts for a very long time, and I still maintain a lot of nuts and bolts. As I said earlier, for my skeptical friends, I'm trying to convince them. But really, yeah, my beliefs have gone, have been cemented in the esoteric, definitely.
Very cool. Well, I don't know how you feel about the guest appearance that you had on the program tonight. If you're planning on doing more, or if this is going to be your one and done.
If somebody asks me, I will say yes, if depending on who they are and why they're asking me. But yeah, I'm in no rush to make myself any more of a public personality than I already am. I hope the answers I gave were interesting and I didn't stutter and stumble too much.
Oh, you did fine, man. And again, it was a pleasure to talk with you. I think we share a lot of very similar ideas about things, and it was great talking to you.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, Andrew. Keep up the good work. Really
Thanks,
love
you
your
too.
show, and
Yeah, same here.
we'll talk again soon, no doubt.
Very cool. All right, then with
Great.
that, Dave, have a good night, man.
You too. Talk to you later.
Take care.